Back in the day, there used to be a little something called integrity in journalism. Imagine that. And back in those days, an editor would not run a story if he could not trust the source, because he knew that if this story circulated far and wide on the word of a sketchy source, innocent people could get hurt, it could damage the credibility of the paper, and it could ruin reputations. And I bring this up because a lot of you have been believing stories that have been circulated far and wide. You have been believing stories about yourselves that you are too much and that you are needy if you have needs, and if you ask for help, that you are a burden, and things like nice guys finish last, or that you have to prove your worth, you have to prove your value in order to be loved, that you have to earn love and belonging. And many of you are believing these stories without ever having interrogated the source. Who told you that? Where did you get this information? And what makes this source credible? Especially considering how many of you have based your decisions about life, relationships, career, travel, friendship, based on the word of a source that may not be entirely reliable. So in this video, we're going to talk about some of the damaging stories that you've come to believe about yourself and why it's so critically important to interrogate the source. Keep watching. Hi, I'm Dr. Shantae, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. And what I do over here is deep dives into the reframing of cultural narratives through a trauma-informed and sociological lens. So let's talk about it. Let's start with limiting beliefs, okay? Let's talk about the stories themselves, because stories are far and wide. And in my class, when I'm teaching students about literature and critical analysis, I emphasize the fact that it's not what happened in the story. What matters is your interpretation of the story, is your analysis of the story, because in the real world, our interpretation of the story becomes the bedrock for the beliefs that we have about ourselves and about others and about how we're supposed to navigate the world. It's what we believe to be true, right? And so a lot of us have been navigating life with a set of limiting beliefs, things like you are too needy. So some of us were raised by parents or caregivers that made us feel like we were a burden. So anytime we asked for things like food, like, Mama, I'm hungry. Here you go. Didn't you just eat, or you eat me out of house and home? Or even if they didn't say it verbally, their body language, like, I got to get up and feed this child, all of those little messages, those verbal and nonverbal cues, kids soak those things up like sponges. Some of you have been in relationships where you were told that you were too needy. Like, hey, if you're going out, would you just let me know that you made it okay? Or let me know if you're not going to be coming home for dinner on time, just so that I know and I'm not worried. Oh my gosh, like, you're so needy. Why do you need to know that? Like, why are you all in my business? Like, why can't you just be chill? So you're like, oh, I'm too needy. Am I asking for too much? Am I doing too much? And so when you are experiencing these types of dynamics with people who love you or say they love you, and you start to internalize these beliefs that you are too needy, that you are too much. I recently saw the documentary on Netflix, The Manosphere. Yeah. And one of the things that just kind of like shocked me was the fact that a lot of the people in this documentary have this belief that men are not inherently worthy, that they have no value, and they have to create their value. And I was like, what? Like, what? And I mean, legitimately, ironclad believe that. And so those types of beliefs begin to shape our choices, and they are what I call limiting beliefs. So limiting beliefs are ideas that you accept about yourself and others as true that begin to shape your choices in ways that limit or restrict your life, that keep you from living your full potential or being all that you could be, or being loved in all the ways that you could be loved, because you are kind of locked into this mindset, or you are locked into this set of beliefs about yourself that limit your choices, that limit your options, that limit your ceiling, so to speak, of how high you can go and how much you can achieve. And so as a result of these limiting beliefs, we keep ourselves small. We don't ask for too much. We start overdoing, trying to prove ourselves, trying to prove our worth and prove our value. And that leads to things like self-sabotage. It leads to things like insecurity. It leads to things like imposter syndrome. It leads to not feeling safe in your body because you don't feel safe in your networks. Okay, like you walk into your parents' house and you're immediately on pins and needles because you're like, do I look okay? Is there hair out of place? Or you walk into your relationship and you're like, okay, does this person still like me? Am I okay? And you are constantly assessing and reassessing and reevaluating. You're not able to exist comfortably in your life because you are running this tape of stories about who you are, about how other people perceive you, about what you accept as true based on stories or narratives that have been offered to you by people that have limited your scope of possibilities. And what this reminds me of, I remember there is a book I read, oh, maybe 10 years ago, and it's a really good one if you haven't read it. It's called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. And essentially what he talks about is why people sabotage themselves. And he notes these like 4 barriers that keep people from being their best selves, living their best lives, these set of limiting beliefs. And the 4 beliefs are this, I have them in my notes. It is feeling fundamentally flawed, disloyalty and abandonment, meaning if I achieve too much, then I'm being disloyal to my family who is struggling. So what they call it like survivor's guilt. So a lot of times you'll hear NBA players or athletes who have made it out of the hood or made it out of disparate circumstances. And because they've made it while other people in their community have not made it, they feel kind of disloyal, like they've abandoned their community, or they feel responsible for bringing everybody along, which is why a lot of athletes go broke. But I digress. Another barrier is believing that success brings a bigger burden. So, the more money, more problems trope. And then the crime of outshining. So when you are doing something really great, you don't say anything about it because you don't want to make other people feel bad, because you believe or you've been told that you're being a show off, that you're rubbing salt in the wound. Oh, now you think you're better than everybody else. And so you kind of dim your light to keep other people from being uncomfortable. Which brings us to the unreliable narrator. So in literature, the unreliable narrator is a literary device where the person telling the story or the person giving their account of the events cannot be entirely trusted, not because they're inherently evil, but because they have their own emotional distortions. They have their own biases. They have their own limitations, right? So it depends on who's telling the story. And in your life, a lot of these stories that you believe about yourself, that you're a burden or that you're too needy or that you're too much or that you have to prove yourself in order to earn love and all the things, you have to ask yourself, who said that? And if it came from your parents, these are your first teachers, okay? Parents or your caregivers are your first teachers. And so what they say, we accept as the gospel because we don't have any other frame of reference. It's mom and dad. It's mom or dad. And so we accept these stories as true without ever stopping to consider whether or not this story is biased, whether this story has emotional distortion, whether this story has a limited perspective. Because something I said in a previous video is that parents are people. Parents are people. Parents are people, are people, are people, which means that when you take them outside of the role of caregiving for their children and just look at them as standalone individuals, they have their own hurts, their own wounds, their own issues that have not been resolved. And a lot of times the stories that they tell are projections of their own lives, are stories that they've told themselves about themselves. And now they are projecting that onto you because they feel like a burden, or they feel like they were too needy, or they felt like they were showing off, or they felt like their success cost them relationships and what have you. And so they tell you these stories about yourself. You accept it as true without ever stopping to examine, is this a reliable narrator? Is this a reliable source? Is this a credible source? And so sometimes it's a parent, sometimes it's a bitter ex, sometimes it's an insecure teacher, sometimes it's a stressed out youth pastor, and people accepting it as the gospel without ever stopping to ask, is this person a credible and reliable narrator? Does this person have blind spots, biases, emotional distortions, limited perspectives that keep them from telling a different story? Is this a source that I can trust? So some of these stories are like, oh, you think you better than us? What? Don't get too big for your britches. Like, hey, don't get too high on the hog. So we start thinking like, oh, okay, let me kind of keep my options low. Men only want one thing, or nobody's gonna want you with kids, or you better lose a few pounds. Don't nobody want to be with somebody your size. All of that. All of that. I said in a previous video that people tend to judge. Brene Brown says that people tend to judge in the areas where they feel the most shame. And so people take their judgments, their own insecurities, their own areas of shame and unresolved hurt, and they project those things onto you. They tell you these stories. And when you start to accept them as true, it begins to shape your choices. It begins to shape your lifestyle. It begins to shape your career. It begins to shape life itself, because our behavior always betrays our beliefs. No matter what you say, you could be the most, I love myself, I am worthy, I, know my value and all the things. Okay, show me your relationships. I could tell you everything about you based on your relationships, based on who you have in your life, and based on how they treat you. I could tell you everything you believe about yourself based on who you surround yourself with. Trust that, because behavior always betrays beliefs. And so when your beliefs come from people who have abandonment wounds, attachment issues, trust issues, mama trauma, daddy issues, and they are telling you these stories and you accept them as true, it begins to color your canvas in ways that you may not fully realize, to the point where it's hard to distinguish between what is actually your choice and what is your conditioning based on the stories that you have been told. So people that are unhealed, that have some work they need to do because things are not resolved, or there are some traumas that they need to navigate and confront, or what have you. The issue is they tend to confuse their fears with your fate. But that is not true. Okay. All is not lost. How do we turn this around? Because essentially what a lot of us have been given is a map that hasn't been drawn well, right? So if you were following directions on a map that had not been drawn well, that's not your fault. That's the map that you were given. Those are the directions that you were given. But we can change course. We can change our perception and subsequently change our direction. So how do we do that? We can start to interrogate the source. So put on your newsroom editor hat, put on your journalist hat, okay, and start to drill down to the credibility of the source, because you can start to ask questions like, where did this information come from? What are you building this belief on? Like, where is your data? Where are your sources? Where did you source this information from? Well, my personal experience. Okay, well, personal experience is your personal experience. It doesn't have to be my personal experience. And while I can appreciate the lessons or the wisdom from what you experience, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is a directive for my life. So you have to start to question and interrogate the source, and you have to start to question and interrogate the story. If you think that you are too needy or too much, or that nobody's ever going to love you as you are, ask yourself, is this my voice? Does this belong to me? Did I come up with that? Where did I get this from? Okay, because is this my voice that I'm listening to, or is this the voice of a parent that neglected me? Is this the voice of someone who abandoned me? Is this the voice of an ex relationship or an ex partnership where their insecurities were projected onto me? Like, whose voice is this? Because more times than not, it's not your voice. It is you taking on somebody else's voice as truth about yourself. And probably the most important question of all is, what would my life look like? Who would I be if I did not believe this about myself? If you did not believe that you were too much, if you did not believe that you were too old, if you did not believe that you weighed too much on the scale, if you did not believe that you had to prove your value, if you did not believe that story, what would your life look like? Because embedded in that question is the seed of possibility of what your life could be, of where you could go, of the kinds of relationships you could have if you did not believe these stories about yourself from these unreliable narrators and unreliable sources. I think it is really important to shift your gaze, to change the prescription, as it were. If I take these glasses off, y'all, I mean, I can see, but I can't see. It's blurry. Okay, if I put my phone in front of me, I'm like, I can't quite make it out, right? And I think that that's what is happening to a lot of you. I think that you are looking at your life through a distorted lens. Some of you are looking at your life through the lens of a child that was hurt, or a child that was abandoned, or a child that was neglected, or a child that wasn't loved in the ways that you needed to be loved, instead of through the lenses of the adult who is here and present and survived and has agency and opportunity and the possibility of change on the horizon. And so we can't look through that old lens. We can't look through the distortion of somebody else's experience. We have to start to look at our own lived experience, because some of you, many of you, have beat the odds. Many of you have done exceedingly and abundantly above and beyond what your teachers told you you could do, what your family has done. Some of you are the first people in your family to achieve significant success. Let's lean into that. Let's lean into your lived experience. Let's lean into the evidence of the credentials that you've earned, okay, or of the respect that you've earned in your industry. Let's look at different sources, okay? So if we have unreliable narrators, there are also reliable narrators, people who have written books, people who have done research. Let's get some of those books. Let's start to look at those stories. Let's start to look at the possibilities instead of at the limitations. And so let's switch out the narrators from away from people who are emotionally distorted and limited, and into people who are healed and whole and healthy and vetted and peer reviewed and researched. Okay, so let's shift the narrators. Let's change our sources. How about we take the word of trusted friends? Because I know so many people, especially those who struggle with anxiety or depression, your brain can lie to you. Your brain, when it is compromised through depression or anxiety, can lie to you and tell you that your friends, people who genuinely love you, people who genuinely ride for you, people who genuinely just like you for who you are, they're going to they don't like you. They're going to leave you. Eventually you're going to be exposed. Eventually they're going to find you out. Your brain can tell you that. And so if you have people in your life that have demonstrated, okay, who have the receipts and the track record for consistently showing up for you, for consistently including you, for consistently being there for you and loving and liking you exactly as you are without you having to prove it, that is evidence. That is data. That is something that we can use to build and rewrite a different story. Because here's the science behind this. Your brain believes what it hears repeatedly. And so some of you have told yourself this story so many times, or some of you have heard this story from other people in your life so many times that you have started to believe it and you've started to shape your life around it. And so if you want your brain to believe a different story, you have to give it a different story. You have to rewrite it. You have to tell yourself different, even when you don't believe it yet, okay? Because when you are stressed out or you get triggered, your brain will default to the negative. It will default to that well-worn path of you're not enough and you're not valuable and you're not worthy and you're not this and you're not that, okay? So in order for your brain not to default to that, we have to carve a new path. We have to tell a new story. I am worthy. I was always enough. I don't have to prove myself. I don't have to lose 10 pounds. I don't have to be 10 years younger in order to be loved. Like, you have to tell a new story in order for your brain to begin to accept that as truth. And so it won't erase the old story because what's done is done and cannot be undone, but it can be overwritten. Okay, we can do a manual override by beginning to interrogate the narrators, by beginning to dismantle the story, okay, because the story falls apart on the merits of who you are. It falls apart on the merits of the evidence of how you've lived your life and the odds that you have overcome. Okay. So many of you, just by virtue of the way that you live your life right now, have already disproved the story. You've already disproved the lie and dismantled the story. And so now the next step is for you to rewrite and retell yourself a new one, a true one. Does that make sense? And so, my darlings, in the words of Luther Vandross, you are never too much, okay? You are never too much. You are always worthy. You are always enough. And you have to be the one to tell that story. You have to become the reliable narrator, okay? And if you are struggling with anxiety and depression, then that compromises your lens, that distorts your perception. And if you are struggling with that, please seek help. Please go to therapy. Please seek professional support and assistance. Please find the book. So if therapy is not accessible, because sometimes it's just not, there are books, and I will put some of them in my description, that can provide alternatives to the stories that you've been believing about yourself. And some of you might need additional support, medical support or medications. There's no shame in that. There is no shame in that, because sometimes the chemical configuration of our brains just will not let us be great. And there is no shame in needing additional support in order for you to be able to see yourself and your life more clearly. I hope this was helpful to you. If you have any questions, comments, takeaways, you know that you can hop into the comments. I always invite healthy discourse. And if you have not already, I encourage you to like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time.